Battles Magazine, the independent wargame magazine, also the most delayed magazine since Gutenberg. You think it's ironic, but it's possibly not. This magazine is known among wargamers for being excellent and also for coming out very rarely and with some significant delay. It contains nice articles about wargaming, reviews, but again, because of the delay, sometimes you learn about a game and you think like, wow, this is really awesome. Then you contact the publisher and they tell you that the game is long out of print. And so then it's still interesting to learn about these games that you will never get to play, and then you start crying. That's how I respond to that. The game also comes with a war game, 1913, 1936, Miracle of November, Storm over Madrid. So from that, you know that this game belongs to the Storm over family. It has that general idea. It is based on area impulse and area activation, but it has a couple of twists, a couple of things that in my opinion, make it a little more elaborate, a little more complex than other games in the family, while still remaining a lot simpler and more approachable than most war games out there. This is definitely an entry level, definitely a beginner-friendly war game. The topic is, we are in the 1930s. It is the Spanish Civil War, and one side controls the nationalists, and the other side, the Republicans, and the nationalists are trying to take control of Madrid. Two-player game, but it can also be played solitaire by a single player controlling both sides at the best of their possibilities. The map will look familiar to anyone who has played games in the Storm over family. Here in particular, the Republicans will be on the map already at the beginning of the game, controlling Madrid, and this area in general. The nationalists will come from this area, generally speaking, from those entry boxes. There's also one right here, and they will push toward Madrid. There are also waves of reinforcements that really represent the ebbs and flow of the confrontation. The nationalist player wins automatically by taking control of Madrid, or by basically cutting all supply lines that go to Madrid. Those will always ensure the victory of the nationalist player. But then there are the scenarios that add different victory conditions that may give the Republican player also different options, and the nationalist player as well. So the map is divided into areas, and each area has a letter indication, which is simply used for setup purposes, a number, +1, +3, and so on and so forth, which is the defensive value, and also the shape of those indications tells us whether the area is a regular area, like in this case, or an urban area, like in that case. Then we have control markers that will go on the board, one in each area, to determine which side has control. Event markers, there are two separate sets, one for the nationalist player, one for the Republican player, and they simply do different things. They give you different advantages depending on the indication that you find on the back. At the beginning of the game, you separate them, you form different pools, one for the Republican player, one for the nationalist, and during the game, players will purchase different types of advantages. Then we get to the units themselves. So here I'm showing you the one for the Republican player, the ones with the white background. And we have three values. So we have attack value, defense value, and movement. Some units may also have a star there, not all of them. Those are shock units. The ones that don't have it, like this one, they are line units. And then we have artillery units also that have that defensive value and the movement value because they attack in a specific way. Units have two sides, a regular side and then a reduced side that you flip them to when they take a hit. These are the indications here are used for setup purposes. So these units will go on the board, and that is very cool. We want those. I'm kind of putting them randomly. That's not how necessarily will or should go. Players start the game with a number of support points, and they receive more support points during the game based on a schedule indicated on the turn track. Support points can then be used to perform different things during the turn, such as, for example, buying these event markers that can be played when it is appropriate based on the effect indicated there. You can also do other things during the turn using support points. Super mega important. Now, once the main turn starts, after players have had their chance of buying event tokens, event chits with their support points, after reinforcements have arrived, replacements can be used by using 2 destroyed units to bring back one of them into the battlefield. Then the main turn at that point will start. And again, the nationalist player is trying to take control of Madrid, and the Republican is trying to prevent them from doing precisely so. During the main turn, players will alternate taking turns. During your turn, you can do one of 3 things. You can perform a bombardment using artillery units. You select an area that has 1 to 3 artillery units. More than 3 artillery units cannot fire together in a single bombardment. If you want to activate 1 or 2 units in a single bombardment, good for you. Go ahead and do so. If you want to activate 3, then you need to spend a support point. That's what they were for, one of the things. And when you perform a bombardment, then you simply put together, then you apply modifiers that are based, among other things, on the number of units that are firing. If you're firing from an area to an adjacent area, you roll 2 6-sided dice. If you're firing from within the same area, then you roll 3 6-sided dice, and you choose the 2 best results. Again, apply modifiers. Subtract the defense value of a unit selected as the point unit. Say that is the unit, the defensive value would be 8. And the result, that is the difference between the total attack and the defense value, is the number of losses that the defender has to take. We'll talk about losses later. Then during your turn, instead of doing bombardment, you can perform movement, and you simply move your units up to their movement value, moving from area to area. The standard cost to move from an area to the other is 1 movement point, but that is affected by other factors such as the presence of enemy units. And then we have main combats, of course, what everybody wants to know about. Regular combat will be between units that already are in the same area. Unless all the attacking units are assault units, they have that, or shock units, they have that indication from the star, then shock units can move and attack, they can assault. So basically, regular combat units already start in the same area. If you are moving and attacking only with shock units, then again, you can perform the action of the assault. You can assault, which is movement followed by combat as part of the same impulse. To resolve combat, there's a procedure that seems a little bit cumbersome at the beginning, but after a while, it's still a bit cumbersome, but not as bad. Now, first, when Republican line units and artillery units are being attacked, they need to take a morale test. There are modifiers for that change based on different circumstances. The morale of the Republicans is a bit wavering that way. The idea is still that when they're being attacked, they need to take a moral test, and that may indicate that they simply stay there, or that they have to retreat, or that are simply eliminated. So that can be pretty bad. And that's a big challenge, of course, for the Republican player to make sure that not too many of the units run away. After the morale test, if one needs to be taken, step one, you determine the intensity value of the combat, which is based on a base value of 5 to which you add and subtract numbers such as +1 if it's an assault, remember movement plus combat. The defender can also choose a number of units that have a combat value of at least 1 and commit them to counter-attack. The combat factors of the counter-attacking units is also added to the intensity value of the battle. The more units are committed, the higher the intensity value, the more chances that the attacker will take damage, but also, of course, the more of a commitment that is for the defender. So once you have the intensity values, for the sake of the example, let's say it's 8 in this combat, well, you just mark it somewhere, try to remember it. I use dice to mark the intensity value. Then we need to determine the attack value and the defense value. The attack value is the sum of the combat factors of the attacker plus a roll of 2d6. The defensive value is the defensive value, the second number, of a unit selected as the point unit plus the defensive value of the terrain indicated there, P +1. There'll be +1. Compare the defense value with the attack value. If the attack value is higher, then the difference between attack and defense is the number of hits that defender must take. Then, remember the 2d6 that was part of the attack value? If the 2d6 is less than the intensity value, which you calculated at the beginning, then the attacker also will take losses, and the number of losses to be taken is the difference between the intensity value and the 2d6. So that's why the intensity value is high and the attacker rolls low, then they will also take damage. Once you calculate how many hits everybody has to take, then all attacking units are flipped to their spent side, spent or reduced. I should have called it spent or reduced at the beginning. All counter-attacking units of the defender are also turned to their spent side. And then those hits are applied. Those hits are applied by spending fresh units and or retreating spent units and or eliminating units. And this is very similar to other games in the Storm Over family. It gives you that flexibility of how much damage you want to take. And that's pretty much is the general idea. You will spend support points to buy event chits and then using them. You will then alternate going back and forth performing combat, usually to soften up areas before you move in. Mover and maneuver around, move in an assault, or move in, sit there for now, and later declare combat until one of the players has completed the objectives of the scenario. And remember, the big prize here is Madrid. So, Storm Over the Chronically Delayed Magazine is a good game. It's good. It's a good implementation, I believe, of a very solid system that most war gamers already know and they played from other games. I personally like the system very much, and I like this implementation also. Also because it feels different enough from other games in the same family to really feel that it's not just a tired repetition of those ideas. And I like, for example, the event chits that you can purchase and use at different times. Some of the surprise that comes with them is lost when you play the game solitaire like I did, but overall the game was still interesting and fun enough to make it worth it. Also, what you have here is the a system for combat, which is a little more cumbersome, a little more complex, I found, than in other games in the system. But after a while, I didn't mind having to calculate the intensity value at the beginning of combat. Actually, I thought that there was value in that, as you are committing how many units are going to be part of the counterattack. The higher the risk, the higher the possible benefits, but then if you do take a lot of losses as a defender, your units are spent already, so you cannot use the flipping a fresh unit to its spent side as a way of paying for hits, which is of course the standard way that you want to do, because at the end of the turn those spent units go back to their fresh side, and you cannot do that if you committed them to counterattack. So really nice, interesting decisions here. The flexibility of how you spend support points is also very good. At the beginning, as the nationalist player, you have a lot more of those, and you feel really powerful about that. But after a while, and you use a lot of those for some massive attacks, some massive bombardments, you also start being short on those. The Republican player is always short on support points. The Republican player, however, has the problem of having to deal with morale. And again, I believe that that works very well for the solitaire player when you control both sides to the best of your possibilities. Of course, you want some unpredictable elements, and the fact that you do not know who will actually be there in the battle as you're setting up the battle. That's another element that will give you a lot of things to worry about, to think about, things that will prevent you from seeing ahead too much. And so that also is quite pleasant in terms of gameplay, that extra element as I'm retreating units or just removing them from the board. And sometimes none of those units are affected, so hooray! Other times you see the defense of the Republican player vanishing, disintegrating, evaporating, and that also has its own effects on the game. Now, as for the gameplay, for the pace of the game, it can feel a little slow, it can feel a little repetitive because you have a lot of units that you're moving every time, and they kind of like all look the same. The defensive value, the attack values, you don't have such a huge range, and you really want to maximize the concentration, etc., etc., etc. So just it can feel a little bit quote unquote cumbersome in logistically just moving everybody around. But then there are the things that make that a lot more interesting, say for the fact that you have those waves of reinforcements that come at different times, and so it looks like the Republican line is crumbling, and then the nationalists will be able to cut a hole in the defense and just drive towards Madrid, but then a wave of reinforcements comes in. So though technically it's you're gonna move a bunch of these units that kind of look the same from one area to the other, and there are many areas, in that sense it may feel repetitive, then these waves actually will change the pace at which things happen, will change the concentrations around the board. So what you have in essence, despite the fact that it may feel a bit repetitive turn after turn, is a pretty tense game, because it always looks like the Republican line is just about to crumble. And it might. But it also looks like just when you're there to inflict the final punch, as the nationalist, you're just losing steam, you're just slightly short from doing so. So you have the situation in which it constantly looks like one side is going to fall apart and the other side is going to do it, but that's not always the case. I mean, it often looks like that's going to happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen, and that comes the tension, and to me that is quite remarkable. That is what I want in a game. I want to get the sense that things can go one way or the other, if not constantly, very often, because in this is precisely where the tension arises. So in this sense, Storm over Madrid is to me a successful game, because it can entertain, it creates a nice narrative, it allows me to explore a topic which we have seen in Wargame before, but is also not one of the most Wargamed topics ever. So it has all of these nice elements. Maybe one thing that's a negative is about the production. The control markers, I wish they looked more different from regular combat units than they do, precisely because you have a lot of units on the board and it's area, so they're kind of scattered around a little bit. There are times with the control marker you have to look twice to make sure that's a control marker, another unit. Oh, there are 5 units there, I'm going to move there. Oh no, it was only 4 because of the control marker. It just, if nothing else, is distracting that I have to check which of those things on the board are units and which ones are control markers. It's a small negative, and if it tells you this is the worst thing that I found, of course it means that the overall package is pretty solid. The magazine is also very pleasant to read, although sometimes again it looks like it's taking a picture of stuff that came out and then got out of business, or at least got out of print a long time ago. Other than that, it's a nice look into the recent past of war games. But the magazine is fun to read and the game is fun to play, so that makes for a quite nice package.